Um, what do you think a historian brings that a journalist may forget? Too?
Well,
What are we?
let me try to weave these into it, and maybe try to do this. I took them down here for you. One thing to kind of keep in mind is that the journalists are always going for the story, and the stories change over time. And there are journalists who do great work, but they're still going for the story. And this is another offshoot of the baseball, is that we had this dedication landmark in East Los Angeles at Belvedere Park. We had a plaque, and I'm really proud about this. This is also when the book came out at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
But as you all know, government is very difficult to get things done on the federal level, state level, and the local level. So I'm really proud of this. Is that one of the famous Choriceros, longtime manager of the Choriceros, Shorty Perez, we were able to honor that legacy and all those players by having a plaque done at that park, and it coincided with our release of the book. So I think this really says a lot in terms of what the Latino Baseball Project is about and what it can achieve.
And who are the signatures?
The signatures are a number of the players at that time, but I didn't realize they were going to do this, and somebody asked me to sign too, so I signed up here, but then they gave it to me and framed it, so I thought that was kind of strange. But I think this is an important dimension of the community outreach, which this type of public history has permitted. Earlier you asked about transnational baseball, and these are one of the teams that would go back. This club in particular, the 4060 club, they would do a lot of this. And one aspect to keep in mind is that this individual is the first of 3 generations of people that were involved in baseball, organizing games, playing games, but also representing the community in terms of baseball. Now, let me try to kind of link this together and answer your question. The big difference with myself as opposed to those reporters is that I'm working in the same place on the same themes and issues. So I have the ability to then look at a particular theme or subject over time. As you know, I've worked on immigration, I've worked on repatriation, I've worked on the Mexican community in Los Angeles in the early 20th century, and most recently I've been doing this stuff on baseball. Well, I have families that I've interviewed over time. I've interviewed the grandparents, and some of them are deceased. I've interviewed the children. I've interviewed the grandchildren on a variety of different themes. So I have, one could say, that larger, broader understanding. Now, a lot of the reporters that I've had the opportunity to work with, and I've had some really great reporters who really do excellent background work, but they always have a deadline. And some, as opposed to an historian writing monographs, writing scholarly work, we are much more able to extend deadlines. Sometimes also the publishing process, that even though with the technology and everything, is still very slow. I just thinking about books I got commitments to, and I get irritated. When are you going to put the damn thing out? But on the other hand, it does mean that you have this whole involved process of review and editing, and that is really helpful. I think what I've also noticed is that sometimes the constraints that journalists have on publishing and getting the story out means that there are some reporters who will call me at 4 o'clock, and not so much for baseball, but rather dealing with repatriation in the 1930s. They'll call me and they'll want me to give them the history. And to be quite frank with you, I have been really offended that these reporters won't even Google. Because if you Google me, you'll find everything I've done, just basically, just scroll through it. You'll get the publications. You can go from there. You can find it, the reviews of my work, everything, like, any other professor today.
Which was why it was very hard to figure out what I was going to ask the professor, because there's so much information out there.
But I mean, there is, I think, and I've been frustrated by it, because I sometimes I'll tell them, well, just get the book and read the book, but they want me to give them sound bites, and yes, if you tell me, we can prepare, and we could do like we're doing here. We can have an interview, and that's fine. That's okay. But don't ask me 10 minutes before I got to walk into a classroom to give you the history of the world in condensed version in 5 minutes. So my main point is not to really to indict reporters and others, but my main reason I'm mentioning it is that there's a different time frame for the production of the work. To some degree, one could also argue there's a different audience. Maybe my colleagues would say there's a different audience. Myself, because of my evolution and my commitment from the very beginning, I've always been trying to move into a kind of public history direction. And so I want what I do to be known by more people. And I think that's done in a number of ways. I think that's done in writing style. You want to be academic, you want to be sound, but on the other hand, you want to kind of reach out to a larger audience as well. And so, but I think there are those differences as well.
It sounds like journalists have a lot of information in their archives, but they're not doing really everything that.
I'm not going to mention a particular publication, but keeping in mind that it's very hard for journalists today. It's a really tough market. Many of the good ones are like gypsies. They go from newspaper to newspaper, and the newspaper like musical chairs, and they're kind of removing the chairs, and so it's really tough. But I've had phone calls from some journalists, and they say, well, can you tell me this and that? I said, gee, all you got to do is look at the archives of your own newspaper, because I've talked to you. I've talked to your newspaper 2 years ago, and there's a feature thing. Just look it up. Let alone looking at what I published, but what your reporters wrote 2 years ago. You can find it right there. But once again, they're kind of new on the scene. They got the new story. They got to work on it. They might not have worked in LA before. Well, I have the luxury that this is my workplace. I have these issues that I've worked on, etc. So there is that difference. A lot of them are really quality. I mean, I've met, because of the repatriation work, I've met journalists from Canada, from London, from South America, from Mexico, from a lot of different places, and I've really found them, really professional people and very dedicated individuals.
But they just can't really be as dedicated as like a professor specializing in Los Angeles history.
Right. It's a different thing. Yeah. On the other hand, what they produce is important.
Right.
And what they produce, has to be recognized, has to be dealt with.
It is oral history.
Yeah. Right.
Which brings us to everyone can do oral history. I mean, as long as you record it and
well, I think I kind of see oral history that it's really the interviewee and the interviewer together are creating this window into the past. And I would say that at the Hubert Howe Bancroft Library at UC Berkeley, that there are these memorias, these recollections of the old Californios, and those chronicles that are there, those summaries of what they said, those are oral history documents. I would also, yeah, they're not recorded, but I think they are, because there was no recorders back then. I think they served that same type of purpose, because it was the interviewer, I think it was Savage that did this for Hubert Howe Bancroft. He interviewed these Californios, and those Californios shared, and it's the questions that he asked and how he asked them, and that relationship of trust between the interviewee and the interviewer that created this primary source of what happened in the past. And I think those are the same dynamics that are happening, whether it's videotape, whether it's tape recorded, those are the same dynamics, or whether it be a transcript of that. That's my feeling. There's others who kind of define it as an earlier generation might say it's only the transcript, because it has to be sealed and has to be signed off by them, and has to be in a library. But for myself, I think it's whatever record that we have of that. That would be what it is.
What's one thing that you've always found was important for you and your interviews, like when you got there? Like, did you like it to be the interview to play someplace where the person is comfortable in their setting? Have you ever taken a person out of their setting, like to interview
I would
them?
always try to do it in their setting. Always try to do it in their setting, because I think that then provides comfort level. Trust is key. Always try to keep it conversational. Although I always strongly encourage students to write out their questions, but not to ask the question like in a yes or no manner, but try to get a conversation with the individual. And that's why it's so important to videotape or tape record, because that then frees the student and the interviewer to just focus on the interview and the different directions that can take. So to conduct an interview really takes all of your concentration and focus to go through it and to do it effectively. But the main thing I would say is, once again, it is a setting that they're comfortable in. Let me share this with you, and it's an offshoot of my work in terms of repatriation. We did a program about 3 years ago at Cal State Fullerton, and it was regarding the survivors of repatriation in the 1930s. And all these interviews, I had already done interviews with all these people. So we're talking about obviously senior citizens plus, many of them in their 80s, some of them in their 70s. And we invited them to this session, which we were going to focus on it. And we anticipated, and we had a huge turnout. It must have been like, about 400, 500 people. And so as I worked with the program committee, and my wife is also really committed to this, and she was really kind of the person on campus that got this thing all together, we kind of developed this technique that I wasn't going to go in, or my co-author and I weren't going to go in and give a lecture on it and do it that way. We were going to say a couple of opening remarks and comments, kind of put it in kind of an historical type of framework, share a little video clip on it, to kind of, so that the people understood what was going on. And then we had the individuals that we had interviewed, we had them sitting at tables. And we had the audience then visit the different tables. And what we were trying to recreate was really that scenario of interviewing somebody and having them share their history, what that experience had meant to them. And we thought that was really the best way to do it, because we didn't want to kind of, just go through video clips of interviews. That would have been nice, but that would have been actually not as personal, not as touching as, doing an interview face to face, like we're doing right here. That human quality of being able to do it. Now, Skype is okay, and that's good, and I can see the value of that. But that being in the same room, face to face, etc., has a power to it.
Have you done the Skype interview?
Yeah, I've done one or two, but I don't know. It's kind of hard to kind of I mean, it's not the same. It's not the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
But my main point was that we did that, and then the people themselves. I mean, they're working class people, and they got caught up in this, and they're older people, and it's more difficult to get senior citizens to be in this type of scenario. People become kind of a little bit more rigid as they get older, and not saying that as everybody, but I'm just saying there tends to be that movement in that direction. And these people weren't used to standing up before a group and talking to them
about themselves.
About themselves. And I thought that really worked well. It really worked well, because and a lot of them were still nervous about it. But it's different if they're sitting down and they're at a ballroom table, like there's 8 people there, and they said a couple of things and they asked questions. It's like they were talking to their grandchildren. They were talking to their neighbors.
A big room with
yeah. Well, they had all these little tables, kind of broke up the audience. Had about 10 to 15 of them there, and that really.
Were they mic'd?
We missed it on that. We did it twice. We did it a number of times, but we didn't get into miking them and all that other stuff. Maybe we should have. We should have. But anyway, but I using this as a demonstration of, once again, the comfort level is important, and I think, and this kind of leads to another issue here of why we do this. With my focus, working class people, bottom of the social economic ladder,